Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Nonpartisan Voter Engagement How to for Nonprofits. I'm Tiffany Gorley-Coder, Policy Counsel at the National Council of Nonprofits, and we're going to get this started. So thank you for bearing with us a little bit here. Today we really want to talk about voter engagement from a nonprofit, nonpartisan aspect of it. What you can do, what you can't do, how to get more people involved, and most importantly, how to have your community heard. So with me, I have Gwen Stembridge from Nonprofit VOTE, and she's going to run us through the nonprofit voter guide that we put together together, both Nonprofit VOTE and National Council of Nonprofits. Before we begin, this webinar is being recorded, and so we will be sending out the recording to all registrants afterwards. So you don't need to ask. We will be sending it to you as soon as we can. All participants' lines are on mute, but please feel free to use the Q&A. We'll be keeping an eye on that for the Q&A at the end. We'll try to get to as many questions as possible. We did have about 40 to 50 questions before this even started, so we'll try to get through as many of the top level, most reviewed questions possible. Quick disclaimer, I'm an attorney, but I'm not your lawyer, so none of the information here is not to be construed as legal or tax advice. But do know that we are, keeping it as nonpartisan and as close to, following the law as possible so that you can feel confident in your voter engagement activities. As I mentioned, there's going to be a follow-up email with the voter engagement guide that we'll be talking about, webinar links, slides, additional materials, evaluation survey. Please fill that out so that we know how to better serve you and do more of these types of webinars that you can use for your own work within your communities. And with that, I turn it over to Gwen Stembridge, who is the Training and Partnerships Coordinator at Nonprofit VOTE and who has been my close partner throughout this entire project. She has a background in trainings and get out the vote efforts, community organizing. She knows it all, and so I'm really happy to be turning it over to her today. Gwen, why don't you just go ahead and share your screen?
Happy to. Thank you, Tiffany, and thanks everyone. Really looking forward to this time together today. I am just going to pull up my slides. Great. Tiffany, I think I need co-host privileges.
There you go.
So thank you. You all know as nonprofit leaders that one of the most important skills we have is flexibility. So it's really great for you all to see that in action. We're just being authentic here. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Yes, so I'm on staff at Nonprofit VOTE, education and partnerships work, and so glad to be here with you all today. Wanted to give you kind of an overview of what we're planning to talk through. We'll talk about what is Nonprofit VOTE, who is Nonprofit VOTE. Many of you all, I'm sure, are familiar with our work, and we're partnering with several of you in various ways, but we'll talk a little bit about that. Some highlights from the Nonprofit Power Report, just as a reminder that it's really important for nonprofits to do this work. And then we'll dive into this guide. I'm super excited about this guide. There are a lot of parts that, as I think about my time working at a direct service nonprofit, how great this would have been and how helpful this would have been for me wanting to do voter engagement. So I hope it is really helpful for you all. Then we'll talk about some additional resources, some call to action, and then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A because I know that you have lots of questions. So Nonprofit VOTE, really our mission is to equip you all as nonprofits to be able to do voter engagement. And we know that when nonprofits do that voter engagement, we build a more inclusive democracy. And that's really the whole idea. Make sure we are representing the people that live in our country and that they have a chance to vote. Wanted to just give a little bit of an intro here for those of you who may be newer to this idea of nonprofits doing this voter engagement work. Just reflect for me here on what percentage of nonprofits do you think do voter engagement? And there's not a chat for this one, but I want you to think about that. I know when I first got this question, and when I hear from people at various trainings, some folks have really high estimates for that number. Some folks have really low estimates for that. And so that it really ranges. But the numbers that we've seen through this Nonprofits Get Out the Vote report was about 1 in 5, or about 20%. I tend to think that number is a little bit low. You can call me biased there. But I think it's really important for nonprofits to take this next step for a whole host of reasons that we'll talk about. So just because there are 1 in 5, or about 20%, that are currently doing this work, doesn't mean that almost all nonprofits they are able to do this work. And so it's really important that that you all get empowered and make sure that you know what you need, have the resources that you need, and build the skills that you need to make this happen. You all have probably heard me talk about the Nonprofit Power Report, but just want to emphasize here that voters who are engaged by nonprofits are 10% more likely to follow through and vote. And we have the data to back that up. If you're a real data nerd and want to jump into all of that data, we know that that number increases from 10 percentage points to 12 percentage points when we're talking about voters of color, 15 percentage points for those earning $20,000 to $30,000 a year, and then 14 percentage points for young voters who are in that 18 to 24 range. So we can build this more equitable democracy if we ensure that there's a level playing field for everyone who is eligible to vote. Wanted to talk about a couple things that are important in this year. I know you are hearing a lot in the media and in the news about this year's election, and you're hearing a lot about the presidential election piece of this. But just want to remind you that there are so many seats in the US Congress. There are court seats, there are statewide ballot initiatives, there are local races in both at the state level and at the local level. So want to make sure that you're just paying attention to those as well. When we look at this voter engagement guide, we're also talking about those often those down the ballot issues, and those down the ballot candidates can have the most direct impact on the people that nonprofits are serving and working with. And so it's really crucial that that we remember that there are all of these issues down the ballot, and this is not just all about the presidential election. A couple other reminders that there are still some COVID considerations, right? I know that there are a wave of cases that have been going around again, and just for general health and safety, remember some of those things that we started, some of those habits we started in 2020. And then another thing to just be aware of is that a lot of state election laws might have changed. And so we've updated our state by state election guide so that you have all of those rules and you are ready to go, even if things have changed in the past 4 years. So just a reminder about some of those things that are important and special about 2024. So now the headliner here is the 2024 voter engagement guide. And this, I hope that you all will nerd out with me about this, because we're all nonprofit nerds as well. But when Tiffany came to us and we talked about doing this co-branded, this collaborative guide, I was super excited because you all as nonprofit leaders and who are leading within your states and within your communities, you have so much power to advocate for the fact that nonprofits are able to do this voter engagement work. You have a really important voice here because you have trust with the other nonprofit leaders that you work with. So this guide is over 40 pages long, so I'll give you that heads up, but it's packed with information, it's packed with examples, and it's really, really, I love some of the specific tools and things that we have. So whether you use a portion of this or the entire thing, we just want you to know that a lot of care, a lot of thought was put into this, and experience from working with nonprofit leaders just like you. So with without further ado, I'm going to go through, I pulled really some screenshots. I know that this has been sent out to you all, but I pulled some screenshots that I think are particularly impactful and important. And we'll go through those just to give you a sense of what the toolkit looks like and what you can get out of it. And then we'll definitely have some time for question and answer as well. So the drum roll. Here we go. The table of contents, I thought we'd just start and I'd give you an overview of the flow here and how everything works. So we'll start out here. There's acknowledgements on the right-hand side. You'll see the table of contents. There's a letter from Tim, your NCN CEO, that is very thoughtful and really gives a good start and a good kickoff to this tool. And then we talk about why nonprofits should engage voters. So there's a little bit of a reference to that nonprofit power report, but also just reminders about the fact that nonprofits often have really deep roots within communities and understand their communities best, often speak the language, whether literally or figuratively, right? You know the needs of your community. And so you are going to be the best messengers to build that relationship. And then getting started, we're going to talk a lot in this about planning. Planning is really crucial to this work, and as far ahead of time as you can start that planning process, the smoother the whole process will go. If you can get prepared and understand all the different ways you're going to incorporate this voter engagement into your work, then the more successful you will be. And so then the first section really focuses on the rules of nonpartisanship. So you all know, as 501c3 organizations, it is our call to remain nonpartisan. And remaining nonpartisan means that we are not engaging with either advocating for or advocating against any candidates. It doesn't mean, though, that we can't talk about the issues that are important to the people that we're working with, that we're serving. And so we'll really give you some clear steps and some clear ideas about things that you can do that are perfectly nonpartisan and safe to do. And then some examples of some gray areas where you might think, oh, maybe we could do this, but there's some guidance there around just how to determine what's good to do and what you don't want to do. You'll also, as we're talking about rules here, there are some resources about finding your state and local election information. So your state board of elections or secretary of state or whatever state agency runs elections in your state, they're going to be one of the best resources. Also, your county level elections office is going to be another really great resource. So one of the things we encourage you to do is find relationships and build relationships with those departments so that you can ensure that you're getting accurate information and, again, nonpartisan information from those government offices. So understanding the rules is really that first part. The second section is about making a plan. So we go through some of those options for voter engagement activities. There are all kinds of things that you can do. I was talking with some colleagues in actually Cleveland, Ohio the other day, and they said they're going to have a Carnivote this year. So I don't think we included Carnivote in your options for voter engagement activities, but I really, you can see this as your springboard for all kinds of ideas. And if you want to have a Carnivote, I'll put you in touch with those folks. But really, any way to make this engaging, make sure that you're engaging your community. Voting is not a boring thing. It's really exciting to think about the possibilities that we can build for our communities. So I just encourage you to think about those possibilities. In the next section of the make a plan is around engaging candidates for office. So you want to think about, okay, is there an election coming up, within the county? And are there things that county level elected officials can make decisions on, and do we maybe want to engage those county level officials in some kind of, maybe it's a candidate survey, maybe it's a candidate forum. Think about the ways that you can engage those candidates, and we've got guides for all of that, examples, we've got timelines, all that stuff to really make sure that you have everything that you need to make that a success. And then there's some guidance around selecting the best activities. So you always want to look at your capacity. You want to set some SMART goals and ensure that that the work that you're doing is sustainable alongside the voter engagement work that you're doing, and you want to make sure you have that balance. And so this will help you with that. And then partnering for success in general. We know as nonprofits, often scrappy nonprofit leaders, that partnering with other organizations is so key, right? We have to do this together. We cannot do this in competition with one another. We have to work together for the better of all of our communities. And so often partnering with different organizations, whether that's partnering with a local voter rights organization that does have trained volunteers, they can come in and do voter registration, or maybe with another organization within your region that you can work together on, engaging voters in some way. So partnering is really important as well. And you want to think about all of that stuff as you're making that plan so that you can incorporate it. The next section, and I love this one so much, this is talking to potential voters. So many of you, and I've already seen some of these questions in the chat, are concerned about, I'm using quotation marks here, because people talk about apathetic voters, or voters who don't, people who don't really seem to care, or are just not planning to vote this year. And I really want to take that, reframe that apathetic voters to talk about disconnected voters. I think often folks just don't quite understand, they're not making the connection between them voting and what's happening in their communities. And so often we can, as nonprofits, can help to make that connection happen. And then also just some reminders, don't forget your staff and your board and your volunteers in all of this as well, because they're all, any of us who talk with community members can be advocates for voting. And then section 4 is really a series of different examples of these nonpartisan activities and these specific guides that go along with them. So you all as nonprofits are able to advocate on ballot measures, and there's just some specifics, some Q&As around that. You can host a phone or a text bank, and there's some guidance around that, even some sample scripts and things like that. How to make a voter registration ask, and then all of this stuff about candidate engagement, candidate forums. What do you do if somebody who you've invited to the forum says, nope, I can't make it, right? All of those kinds of questions, candidate questionnaires, and then a couple of sections specifically on certain populations or certain identities. So engaging potential voters in rural areas and small towns. I know this is something nonprofits are always trying to figure out. How do we, nonprofits often who are based in more urban areas, how do we make sure that we are also providing access to those who live in more rural areas? And so this is gives you some of those tools around voter engagement, and then engaging potential voters with disabilities as well. We want to be sure that everything that we're offering is as accessible as possible to everyone. So that's really crucial. And then a whole list of additional resources, because this is not the end all and be all, even though it is 42 pages long. There are so many other resources out there. And so we want to make sure that we are linking you with good resources that are nonpartisan, that are useful, that are accessible, and all of that. So there's a bunch of resources there. And then I just want to highlight here that there are a couple of examples. Folks are always asking for examples or stories. So we've got a couple in there. We've got Rosie's Place, which is a community center serving women experiencing homelessness. And this is just a really great example of the work that they have done. We'll also be sharing out a link to a video after this that has some great examples. So highlighting a couple pieces here under the making a plan section. One of the pieces, and these are screenshots directly from the guide, but we ask you questions like, who is your audience? You've got to take you may want to just jump in and say, all right, we're going to engage all of the voters and all of the voters in our community at one time. And that is a really lofty goal and might not be realistic for the time frame or the capacity that you have. So we really want to encourage you to think about who that audience is. So is it your members? Is it your service population? Is it some specific group, maybe in a leadership group that you are building up that you want to engage? Is it your board members, a volunteer leadership group, or is it just in your neighborhood, right? Think about who that audience is, how you can focus. Often there is no shame in starting small. You can start small, you can build a program that really works, and then you can build it up later if you want to. But there's no shame in starting small and making sure that it's thorough and follows through. And then also making sure, I just can't emphasize enough the importance of partnerships in this. So geographic partnerships, other organizations in your geographic area, other organizations that are maybe in your state but do similar work. If you do housing, fair housing, or low-income housing, think about those other organizations so you all can collaborate and share resources and to get this done. So open communication, right? We're giving you some of these really practical reminders. It's easy to get moving really quickly and to forget things, some of these reminders about partnership. So defining those roles and responsibilities, and then just really collaborating with each other and promoting each other, pumping each other up, because we can all use that these days, right? And this one, I pulled this one because this is the question that we get so often, and I'm sure that you all are getting it as well. You get people who come back and say, I don't want to register to vote, or I don't care about voting. And so we're here to give you some really practical advice with that. It's okay to respect their hesitancy. People have a lot of different reasons for voting and a lot of different reasons for being hesitant about voting. You can't convince everyone, right? That is not the goal of this, but you'll get better at trying and really connecting people. Like I said, I don't think it's a voter apathy issue. I think it's a voter connection issue. And I'd really love to start to reframe that, because you think about, I woke up this morning and I woke up to an alarm that is on my phone, which is plugged into, the electrical grid. That is something that politicians and elected officials are making decisions on in my community. I drive on streets or walk on sidewalks, and there are decisions that are made by elected officials that impact all of those things. So it's easy to just focus on the things that are getting a lot of press attention, or these social issues, which are all very important as well. But sometimes just making that connection and saying, like, yeah, those potholes that you're really frustrated with on, Smith Road, there are some elected officials that can make decisions about that. So you might want to pay attention to, who you're voting for. So really making that connection is crucial. And then also reminding folks that they won't be voting alone. They're voting with and for families, neighbors, and community. So the decisions that you make, it's not just about what is best for you always. Sometimes it's about what's best for your elderly neighbor, or for a young person who's in your community who can't vote yet because they're not of age. So just those reminders that this is about a collective vision and us really working together to make our democracy work. That can be really important and can help people make that connection. And then answering some practical questions. I also love this toolkit because we really got down to, okay, what are the questions that we get from nonprofits most often? And often it is like, okay, can staff members use their personal account? And this is specifically referring to a social media account to support candidates. And we get a lot of questions about this. If you take off your, can you take off your nonprofit worker hat and speak about an issue that, and so we really want to give you some guidance about that. And really make sure that those things are separate, because you don't want to be in a situation where you are putting your nonprofit at risk because of something that you're saying. So we just want you to be really careful and intentional about that. But then there's other questions that come up about, is my nonprofit responsible if a partisan organization shares our posts? And no, you're not responsible for that. You're not responsible if a candidate comes up to your building when no one is there and takes a picture with it, takes a selfie with that and shares it. You can't monitor your building 24/7 and make sure that no one takes a picture with it. What you can do is make sure that your executive director is not there smiling for the picture with that candidate. That's a thing you can control. But these are just some really practical things to think about. And then utilizing trust in the community. So organize your voter engagement around local events. Figure out, is there a popular concert that's going to happen, or is there a food pantry that is happening, or something else where people are going to already be there, and so you can be there. Link that voting to something that is safe and familiar is great. And then some important points here too that I love. This just goes back to some of the practical information that's in this toolkit. If you're unsure if a website is from an actual governmental office, you can always look and see if it has .gov at the end. This was just a tip that blew my mind at some point when I realized oh, we can share things directly from the Secretary of State or directly from that elections office, and they're going to have the most up-to-date and accurate information. Some websites are easier to read than others. I will be very transparent about that. But if you can take that information and then put it into a method, or put it into a format that communicates really well to your audience, then it'll be really powerful there. Also, there's lots of different options for voter engagement activities. You can always start small and grow your efforts like we talked about. And then we've got some of these phone numbers here for election protection hotlines. So if you run into voters that have issues, then this also is in multiple languages. So you've got that just at your fingertips. I wanted to just remind folks about some of these activities that nonprofits can do. And this really is outlined in the guide. You can register voters, you can send election reminders, you can distribute nonpartisan candidate guides, host forums, really amplifying any voter education information. You can drive people to the polls, right? There are all of these different things that you can do. Wanted to just also remind you that you've got all sorts of resources from NCN, from National Council of Nonprofits, and we're so grateful for that partnership. And we are also here to equip you with all kinds of tools. We've got a free national webinar series. Our next webinar is tomorrow about AI and misinformation and avoiding misinformation when it comes to election information. And then we also have a resource library with all kinds of tools, including this toolkit. And there are lots of those tools that are referenced in the guide. But if you're interested in any of the rest of this, please don't hesitate to reach out. In addition to National Voter Registration Day, just have to put out a plug to make sure you mark your calendar for September 17th for National Voter Registration Day. And there's some of these links here also that are in the guide, and we'll share out afterward as well. We invite folks to take the Nonprofit Vote Pledge, and this is really just a chance for us to give you information, follow up with you, and make sure that you have the tools that you need and access to the webinars and all of that. My little plug for National Voter Registration Day. But that's what I've got for you today, and I'm happy to open it up to questions. I'll probably pass it back to Tiffany.
Thank you, Gwen. I think we got through a lot of really good information. We've had a ton of really good questions in the chat too. So I'm going to try to get through as many as possible, and I might take a couple and you can take a couple, and hopefully we'll make a lot of people some, give some pretty clear answers. So there was a couple questions about, let's start from the beginning. So, newly formed nonprofit, probably, I'm going to guess, probably volunteer led, doesn't have a lot of, funding. What can they do to get involved? I know you just mentioned National Voter Registration Day. Can you talk a little bit about some of your free benefits of signing up for that?
Absolutely. So one of my favorite benefits of signing up for National Voter Registration Day is the swag. You get stickers, you get buttons, you get posters that you can either just have those posters mailed to you, or we are working with Canva this year, and you can update and kind of personalize the information for your National Voter Registration Day event, and then print the posters yourself with your information on there and the National Voter Registration Day logo and everything. So it's all kinds of resources, reminders about how to register voters, all this information about National Voter Registration Day. So please do sign up there to be a community partner. It is not too late at all. Please join us. And it's September 17th.
It's completely free. So if you don't have a budget, that's where I would start. That is an easy, simple step that everyone on this call can do. And so a couple other questions I'm going to just answer. Yes, you can get the recording. There was a little bit of confusion. We use the term voter engagement guide and toolkit interchangeably. They mean the same thing. You get the link to that. I think we also already sent that out, but we will send that again. You'll get the slides to everyone who's asking about that. And yes, there will be a follow-up email with all of these resources with the recording as well. And that will all be public. So you're welcome to share that with your members. You're welcome to share this recording. There was a lot of questions about nonprofit nonpartisanship. And so I want to take the minute to answer those questions. There is a whole nother recording that Gwen and I and a couple of our other colleagues did back in February that goes deep into nonprofit nonpartisanship, and we are fully for it, 100%. We as 501c3s are required to be nonprofit nonpartisan in law, fact, and purpose. And so we have an hour and 15-minute video on that. We'll send that video out as well. So please dig deep. The main benefit of being nonpartisan is that we don't have to deal with all the partisan operatives coming in, trying to take our resources, our time, and try to themselves in power. So that is what we love about being nonprofits. And so we're really about just getting out the vote, getting people's voices heard, and doing their, being able to take advantage of their constitutional duty and rights. So with that, just wanted to make sure we hit nonpartisanship hard, because we at National Council, and I know you at Nonprofit Vote, also care about that very deeply. Couple other questions. So these are just yes, no, what's in the guide, Gwen, question for you. So is there state-specific voter registration information or information on where to find it in the guide?
Yes. It's the short answer. And I'll give a plug too, there are some of you all state organizations, state affiliates are also working on some state specific guides. So that's part of that too. So you'll get that state-based information for some of the states.
Wonderful. And then is there information about ballot measures? Can nonprofits engage on ballot measure information advocacy?
Yes, there is a whole section on it. And I was just about to find the page number for you, but it's in the table of contents, so you can get it there.
And just to be clear, so ballot measure advocacy is not partisanship. It has nothing to do with supporting or opposing a candidate for public office, which is what we are not permitted to do as nonpartisan. So ballot measures and issue advocacy in general, that's what, if you are a nonprofit that are mission driven and you are focused on an issue, that is completely separate from partisanship. And so keep doing that, be engaged in that. And if a ballot measure is dealing with those issues as well, then you're welcome to do that. The caveat is you need to keep track of that, because that's going to affect your lobbying reporting and things like that. All this information is in the previous recording as well, which we are going to send out that we did in February. Another question, is there resources you had mentioned on one of the slides that inside the guide there is, are there phone numbers for if you don't speak, if there's, you know, a non-English speaking community, do you have resources for that?
Absolutely. So there are phone numbers for the election protection hotline. We also have we did a webinar on staying nonpartisan for nonprofit organizations in both English and Spanish that you can find on our website. And yes, there are tools and references, especially to other organizations that have expertise in that area.
And we have a couple questions about candidate forums. So are there resources on candidate forums? And then specifically, if you do a candidate forum, being a neutral site, what is, you know, how do you go about that? And then what if you invite all the candidates, but some of the candidates don't show up? Is there resources about that?
Yes, so there are absolutely resources about that. A lot of those like frequently asked questions are in that guide. And you know, it's really important. I'd say this also as not an attorney, and this is not legal advice, but make sure that you are equally inviting all of the potential candidates for a position. And so you should be good if you are equally, you know, inviting all of those candidates. And it is not your responsibility whether or not they show up, but it's your responsibility to ensure that they have equal access.
Reaching rural communities, are there resources on that?
Short answer, yes. There's a whole page. It's page 39.
There you go. And just so you know, these are real questions that came in. I'm not throwing softball questions that I'm making up. These came in before we even started. So want to make sure that everyone who had these questions are getting the resources they want. Here's one that we got a couple things, and I know this is a big issue right now, is disinformation and misinformation. And Gwen, I know that you have a webinar coming up that Nonprofit VOTE's putting on. Can you talk a little bit about kind of how to break through that noise, how to address it when you see it, and then what your webinar is going to be talking about coming up?
Absolutely. So I know this is a really hot in the media right now. It's really important to remind folks that this process in our democracy has been around for quite a while, and there are lots of safeguards in place to ensure that we have a fair and equitable election. And there are all kinds of resources. I think someone asked about vote.org. Vote.org is a great resource. I've been giving vote.gov as a great resource. That is going to send you, again, that .gov is a good way to tell if that is a trusted resource that, you know, represents a government entity, and so they're the ones sending out that information. So that'll send you to your state offices. You can get information there. And then there are you know, these nonpartisan organizations. Nonprofit Vote is going to have nonpartisan things. National Council of Nonprofits is just keep a lookout for that, and make sure that the information is, make sure that you're checking that information, that you're fact checking yourselves before you share out information.
Speaking of resources, there's another recommendation in the chat, and I think this is a great one, is to reach out to your local League of Women Voters, especially if you're doing a candidate forum. I know that they have a ton of resources on that, and they have a lot of experience nationally, but at the local level as well. And so yes, we definitely encourage that as a great resource. There was a question about, this is something that actually isn't in the voter guide or voter engagement guide, but perhaps what you could talk about it a little bit is engaging younger voters, and engaging maybe senior communities. So that's something that we don't have in the resources, but I know that Nonprofit Vote actually deals with that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really important with any of those communities that, you know, have there's different ways that are going to different methods of communication that are going to speak to, you know, an 18-year-old versus an 80-year-old. And so, yeah, you'll want to just make sure that you're working with organizations that have expertise in working with those communities, right? If you know that the youth vote is really important, but you have resources about voting, but you don't have many resources around how to talk with youth, maybe build some relationship with your local Boys and Girls Club or Big Brothers Big Sisters, or another youth serving organization, because they are going to know what the youth are talking about and how to, you know, how to reach the youth. And same with senior organizations, right? They're going to know how to get information out, and you know, arrange transportation or whatever is needed. So really just rely on those partners that have that expertise within those communities.
Um, Going back to candidate, or actually going back to registration events, holding a table. Uh, Say you're doing it in partnership with, or you hearing about an event happening in your community and you say, that would be a great place that we're reaching a whole, new demographic. I think of like concerts, right? You hear about this a lot at concerts. What is the best practices for like actually going about it? Do you contact the event? Who should you get permission from, or who should you partner with before you just show up and say, hey, everyone should register and vote? What do you recommend, or do's and don'ts of that kind of environment?
That's such a great question, because often you also find out about these things not necessarily super early, right? You might find out a little bit last minute, and so yeah, it's important to get permission if you're going to show up in a space and register voters. I think, you know, any organization that's putting on an event, they want to be able to vet who is coming to their organization. Even if you know that you are doing it in a nonpartisan way, they may not know that yet because they don't know you. So this is again where like partnerships and building relationship comes in and becomes really key. So I think definitely get permission ahead of time is best practice with any of that. And start to build those relationships now and ask those questions, you know, check with a local organization that you know puts on these events and say, hey, what have you got coming up? Can we, you know, can we be a part of that? Is there, you know, is there something around Halloween? Is there something around Labor Day? Is there, you know, what all are you doing? And how can we be a part of it and do voter engagement there?
So switching from that to candidate questionnaires. So there's also a section in the voter engagement guide about candidate questionnaires. Um, what are some of the things that people should know about doing them, sending them out to the public? What happens if you only get, two of them to respond, or people leave things blank? What do you do in that kind of situation?
Yeah, that is a little bit of a tricky situation, I know, because you want to be sure that you are just offering as equal an opportunity as possible, and you want to be sure that you're staying nonpartisan within all of that. One of the things that a question that comes up a lot is around certain issues that may or may not be associated with certain parties, and so I always like to just remind myself and other folks that we're working with that, you know, just because an issue is politicized by a certain party doesn't necessarily mean that it is partisan, right? We can all care about fair housing. We can all care about these certain issues. And especially if your organization has expertise in that issue, it's okay to talk about that issue. As long as you are not, you know, if you're an environmental organization and you decide to start talking about youth issues that are, you know, not related, then that may seem like you're creeping a little bit and maybe construed as being, you know, partisan in some way if there's an elected official that has a strong stance on that. But yeah, there are all kinds of organizations also that have examples of this. I think the League of Women Voters is one of those well-known examples, but there are lots of organizations, issue-based organizations that do this really well. And so, yeah, you can also talk with them and gain some expertise there. But anything else? Also, Tiffany, like you may have great answers to some of these as well. So please jump in.
Yeah, I think we're at time. I think we're at 3:45, but Gwen, if you're okay, maybe we can stick on for another minute or two and answer a couple more of these. But I know some people have to go, but yeah, so couple more resources, vote11.org, which is run by the League of Women Voters. Wonderful resource. We definitely recommend that. We'll be sending out a list of these resources as well. It's in the voter guide at the very end. But we also have some both on our website and Nonprofit Vote's website. So we'll include that in the link in the follow-up email as well that you're all welcome to use. Couple of questions about C3s and C4s. Maybe I'll take that one. So we, National Council of Nonprofits, only deal with C3s. As a 501c3, you are required to be nonpartisan. That is what separates us from all the other tax-exempt statuses. There's about 20 to 25 different tax-exempt categories, but we only deal with C3s, and that's what sets us apart. C4s are a completely different entity, and sometimes they're partnered. So sometimes you'll hear about an organization that has a C4 arm. We don't deal with them, but they have different rules. C3s must be nonpartisan. And whenever we say nonpartisan, that means that you cannot support or oppose a candidate for public office, and that is in the internal work code. All of this is also very clearly laid out in the voter engagement guide as well. So if you have any questions about the differences, take a look at that. There was another question about, okay, so endorsements. Can you list resources that does candidate endorsements? I don't quite know where that question's going about. So we can't endorse candidates. Like that's the whole point of being nonpartisan. But if a candidate is taking action, we don't encourage you to say, hey, this candidate is, you know, is doing a good job with this or that, because that's showing your partisan leaning, and that is not permitted under 501c3. So stay away from candidate endorsements. And then I think we're pretty close to being done. Gwen, I do want to ask you one last question that I think everyone would benefit from, which is, how do you get buy-in from your staff and specifically your nonprofit leaders or your organization leaders to do things like do voter registration drives? But maybe you could also talk about Nonprofit Vote's nonprofit staff vote campaign as well. I think that's a great place to end, so that everyone on this call, if you are a nonprofit, hopefully by the end of it, you know that you should be doing this.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I think the buy-in piece is often because there is so much caution around political issues, and there's concern about 501c3 status and all of that. But I hope that you are equipped now, at least with these tools. And I think this guide also, and with the endorsement of National Council of Nonprofits for this guide and this information, I hope this really gives you a tool to use to advocate with your leadership or with your board, that this work is really crucial. This work also just helps to build your community power. Organized and registered communities are going to have a stronger voice with elected officials. Generally, elected officials are going to listen to communities that are registered and that are engaged. And so that's really crucial. And it also just helps to build the empowerment of the folks that you're serving, right? Often folks who are being served by nonprofits may feel a little out of control of their lives, right? If a lot of things have happened to them that are outside of their control, then this is something that is within their control, right? This is something that you can do to make your community better, to improve your life. And so it can be a really empowering opportunity for our communities.
I think that's a perfect way to end. Thank you, Gwen, and thank you, Nonprofit Vote. And I will be the first to say, please make sure you're registered and please go vote. And we'll be sending out all of these recordings and resources shortly. So thank you all for joining. Have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you, Tiffany. This is great.